Welcome to the EFC webinar. My name is Karen Stiller. I'm an editor of Faith Today magazine. Today we're talking about pornography recovery, whether that's for you in your own life or if you're helping someone you love and care about who's gotten tangled up in the harmful use of pornography. We're joined today by two experts. Toni Dolfo-Smith is with us from Vancouver, and Dianne Kuglin is with us from Medicine Hat. So I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves and briefly share their expertise on this topic, and then we will begin. And before I do that, I just want to remind you, as the webinar viewers and participants, that we highly value your questions, and we invite you to send them in at any point during the webinar using the chat function on your screen. So let's begin. Dianne, will you say hello and tell us about some of your work?
Hi, good morning. My name's Dianne Kuglin, and I'm from Medicine Hat, Alberta. I'm a certified addictions counselor, as well as a certified professional counselor and an ordained minister. And I worked as a recovery pastor for just over 10 years in a church here, and then opened private practice. I've had my private practice for almost 2 years, called Standing Stones. And this is an area that I really want to specialize in, is sex addiction. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Good, thank you. Toni?
Good morning. My name's Toni Dolfo-Smith. I'm out here in Vancouver. I think it's not so much my academic credentials that actually qualify me to speak on this. It's more, even though I do have those, for me it is more about the fact that I am actually a recovered sexual addict. And I have been in my own recovery process for 30 years. And I actually have worked with other men and women in their recovery process in the last 25 years or so. So I would say that's the credentials I have to
Great.
actually speak on this topic.
Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. So again, a reminder to everyone that you can send in questions at any time. But I'd like to start by talking about the scope of this problem. It's obviously easier to access pornography than it's ever been before. And, I think we all know that pornography is also more vivid or brutal than it's ever been before. So what are you two seeing out in the field in your work area about the extent of this problem? And Dianne, maybe you could begin with that.
Sure. I think, Karen, that there is really no way to measure the scope, because I think it's really that big. Okay. I think that the easy access makes it so, we can't even imagine how often people are accessing it, men and women and children. And so it's a big scope, and I'm seeing it in my practice all the time. I've seen it in the church, and the more we talk about it, I think the more we recognize just how large it is.
Okay. Toni, how about you? You talked about your own personal experience, but you're also with an organization called Journey Canada, and you're talking about this issue all over the place. Tell us what you're seeing and experiencing.
Yes, I agree completely with Dianne. We can't actually say, this is the full scope, because it is so large. I think one of the things that we are very concerned about as a ministry is that we are seeing kids who are younger and younger actually not just viewing pornography, but actually becoming addicted to pornography. So every day is part of the addiction is happening every single day. And I think with the easy access to pornography, whereas before people, sort of had to jump through certain hoops, they'd have to go to a store, they'd have to risk, seeing the potential of seeing other people. With pornography being so readily accessible, I think there are no boundaries anymore. And so I think we are just beginning to see the scope of this problem.
I think let's talk about the word addiction for a moment, because I think sometimes we think of addiction as just to do with alcohol or drugs or gambling. How does one become actually addicted to pornography, or how do you know if you are? Toni, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I think one of the words I like to say to people when we first start working with them is that this has become a coping strategy rather than saying it's an addiction right away. I think when someone understands that they use pornography to cope, usually it begins with people having really deep needs that they maybe have tried other things to fill, but there's something very compelling about seeing images that seems to draw people in. And when those images really connect to actual sensory feelings within the body, I think it really leads people to kind of want more and want more and want more. And that to me is how coping struggles become addictions.
Okay. Dianne, is there anything you'd like to add to that about the idea of it being addiction that we should know about?
Well, I think when people see that it's compulsive, that they've tried to stop on their own maybe and can't, when it's having problems in their life, in their family, if they're ashamed, some of those things would lead towards it being an addiction. Yeah, and a lot of people don't see it as an addiction because even in the DSM, they're talking about different things than a pornography addiction, other than the compulsivity of it. So,
Okay, you said DSM. What does that mean? Sorry.
so the psychological manual,
Oh, I see. Okay.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay. Let's talk about this as it exists in the church, because we keep hearing that, Christians are not immune to this. And I think we know we're not immune to too much, actually. But if you are an active Christian, it may be even more difficult to come to terms with this thing in your life. Is that true, Dianne? And how do we counteract that?
yeah. I think it's true because I think that there's even that much more shame. Because as a Christian, we tell ourselves that we should be better, we should do better. But so the shame and the embarrassment and the secrecy, I think, I think for some people who don't have the same maybe moral compass, for some it's okay. It doesn't affect them, or they think, boys will be boys or girls or whatever. But in the church, I think we expect more, we want more, so we keep it more secret.
Okay. Tony, is up in your experience as well? Do we have this extra layer of shame that we need to get around?
Yeah, I do think so. I think for me, as I work with churches and organizations, I think one of the issues we see is that sexuality in general is not actually talked about within the Christian community. For a lot of young people, what they hear is "don't do it," and um, so so for them, doing it or looking at pornography becomes this thing of, well, I shouldn't be doing it, so I shouldn't actually be talking about it. And so I think to actually speak about healthy sexuality and also sort of the negative effects of what pornography actually does to people.
Okay, well, let's talk about that now then. What are some of the negative effects that pornography has on people? Tony?
Um, I think one of the things we see within our ministry quite often when people come for help is that the relationships have actually broken down. So, for example, a guy coming and saying his relationship is broken down with his wife and he's been addicted to pornography for a long time. What we see very, very often in those circumstances is that the idea of watching pornography gives you this idea of how you think sex should be or how you think relationships should be. And it's a relationship with a two-dimensional object, really. It's not with a real person. And so oftentimes the way people view pornography becomes how they think that should be acted out in everyday life. And so I would say that's one of the main issues that we actually see happening.
So then you're harming, if you're married or if you, even for your future relationships, I assume then you can damage what could be a beautiful sex life. Is that right?
Absolutely. So your expectation of what should be because of your viewing of pornography is actually compromised by you watching pornography because you have an idea that this is how it should be, when in reality, that's not how real life actually works.
Okay, Dianne, is that been your experience too in terms of the harm done?
For sure. And I agree what Toni said there about not talking about sexuality and how we need to talk about that. But also, so often with pornography, masturbation is included, and so that robs you also. I think
Okay.
it robs your partner. It robs you of a healthy sexuality.
Yeah. Let's talk about the partner now. So, if you are the wife or the husband of a user of pornography, you're probably, I'm going to guess, damaged by this. Your self-esteem as an obvious place to start. But what does the partner experience, and how can they work this out in a marriage or in a relationship? Toni?
I think the partner experiences some kind of isolation because they actually not part of something which is actually consuming their partner's life. And so oftentimes they'll be aware that something's happening, but actually not know what to do with it. They may, suggest, is this happening in our relationship? And their partner may actually say, no, nothing's happening at all. But what happens then is this increased detachment and a sense that their togetherness, there isn't anything actually keeping them together because the one partner is covered and filled with shame
Okay.
of what they're doing, feeling like they're really unworthy of being in the relationship, and then actually perhaps even wanting the partner to act like the pornographic images that they're actually viewing online.
Dianne, how about from your perspective? Do you see damaged partners in your
Yeah,
office?
yeah. I think that partners will often take it in personally that it's about them. If they were thinner, if they were nicer, if they offered more sex, if whatever, they take it on themselves, and that itself can be very damaging, because if they feel rejected, a lot of them too, I think, are in denial. Like, I've actually asked women, does your husband look at pornography? And they say they don't know, or they think they're suspecting that they are, but they don't actually ask. And when I say, well, why don't you ask? It's like, well, they would get mad at me, or they'll just deny it. And I think that's an issue when partners aren't free to talk to their spouse, because of,
Right.
because we have to talk about it.
Yeah. Um, I I mean, what strikes me is in our culture now, in our entertainment, I mean, it seems to be this given that couples or women and men individually, but use pornography together. Like it almost seems like it's become normalized in a way that is a kind of a new thing. So I'm wondering if if you agree with that, and how we as a church speak into that without sounding, like we're trying to ruin everybody's fun or whatever we might get accused of doing. Dianne, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think that does happen. And again, one person will want it more than the other person oftentimes. The wife may go along with it, or the opposite. The wife may want to spice things up a bit. And sometimes that's how an addiction starts. Sometimes they're viewing it together just to spice things up, but one of them continues to look.
Hmm.
It's a compulsion, and they want to learn more, they want to see more. And so I think it's dangerous to do that. But absolutely it happens. And for some people, they don't see harm in that. But it's what goes on afterwards. I mean, there can be harm. It means that there's other work to do, I think, for the couple. There's
Okay.
other ways of spicing that up, and it would be, growing closer emotionally and spiritually, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Toni, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I would very much agree with Dianne. I think, but again, I'd come back to some of what I said earlier on. I think that as the church, as the body of Christ, I think we have not focused sufficiently on looking at sexuality in proper context. Even, I think even in terms of marriage, I think we think, okay, so and so is married now, so they're okay. But
Mm,
really, oftentimes that's just the beginning of the struggle. we encounter many men and women whose addiction to pornography actually begins after they get married, where they discover that the fantasy of how they thought things were going to be or how their needs would be met actually does not happen. And so I think as a church, as the body of Christ, I think we have done insufficient really education and mentoring around marriage, issues of sexuality in marriage.
Okay, so how do we remedy that? What are your suggestions, Toni, for the church?
Well, firstly, I think we actually have to provide places where people who are dealing with any of these kinds of sexual and relational issues really do have a safe place to talk. I also think that we actually need to stop singling out particular things as things we talk about in terms of sexuality. I think we have to call all people to the radical ethic of Jesus, the radical sexual ethic of Jesus. And I think we actually have to talk about sexuality in a way more holistic way. I think Christianity gets kind of a bad rap for being a religion that doesn't actually talk about sex and passion and all that. And I think it's quite the opposite. I think we need to actually talk about how God intended sexuality to be this wonderful thing between men and women within the context of marriage.
Yeah, yeah, I can't say I've heard a lot of sermons or presentations on that, but I can totally see that. Like you enter into marriage probably with one set of expectations, and you maybe are embarrassed to even speak with each other about it. So,
Right.
Dianne, how have you seen that working out in your practice? I'm assuming you have couples coming in. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think what Toni said is bang on. There's people who I've talked to men who struggled with pornography, maybe in their teens and even through Bible college, and they really think that when they get married, that's going to go away because now they're going to have real sex as opposed to sex with themselves, and they really think it's going to fix everything, and it doesn't. And now they've got this secret and this secret shame and guilt that they're living in, and their partners are now a part of that, and they don't even know it.
Okay. So let's say someone is watching this webinar today or knows someone who is actually using pornography, and our assumption, our common belief here is that that's a problem to begin with. But let's say they're starting to feel uncomfortable with it and think, well, maybe I'm addicted. What can they do? If you're the person who's using the pornography and you're watching this webinar, what should the first thing that woman or man should do? Dianne?
I think the first thing they need to do is seek somebody out and talk about it.
Like a friend or their pastor
Friend,
or
pastor, a counselor, someone safe. It might not be safe to go immediately to a friend that you think, especially, I hate to say this, but even in the Christian realm, you might think that you're going to a Christian friend and it's going to be safe, and they're horrified or they judge, or it's human nature. And so if the first person you're going to talk to is a pastor or a counselor, just you want to talk about it, whether that's at a recovery group or something. But yeah, definitely getting the secret out, because I believe we're as sick as our secrets. So as long as it's a secret, we're not gonna make any changes.
like I'm picturing someone going to speak to the wrong person, and
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, can happen, and that person's like, oh well, you just need to stop. And what damage does that kind of a response do? Because some of us may not be users of pornography, but we may be the person that the friend comes to. So how should we respond?
Lovingly.
Okay.
Lovingly. There isn't shame in that. We need to talk about it. And so the other end, if we're the recipient hearing that, it's listening with no judgment. It's just listening. It's a struggle. It's a very real struggle. And so not adding to the guilt or the shame, not judging, just listening.
Okay, Toni,
Yeah.
what do you have to add to that? How should we respond and how should we approach if we have the one with the issue?
Right. So I would firstly I would say to the person who's coming, tell the whole truth.
Okay.
Don't hold back. But to the one who's hearing it, I would say try to, rather than try to give advice or tell the person what to do, really help that person um, by asking questions around what their lived experience is. So ask them about, when this happens. Ask them about if anyone else knows. Empathize with them. Do not recoil in horror, as Dianne said. Really, actually be present to them in the way that you would like someone to be present to you if you were sharing something that felt shameful to you.
Okay.
And I, in very simple things, I'd say, really watch your facial expressions,
Hmm.
watch your posture. Be open, not sort of like starting to tense up.
Right.
Really, just remain a non-anxious presence for
Okay.
the person sharing with you.
So, to take that a little further, then, I mean, it sort of comes down to that extra layer of shame we lay on top of this issue. So, if I had a friend come to me, should I just sort of quickly try to realize that this is a bad habit or sin, just like any other one? I mean, it'd be no different than if they said to me, I'm drinking too much.
Absolutely. I think part of what we tend to do as Christians is we rate sin.
Okay.
So, so for some of us, pornography may be rated like an 8. And so we react to hearing various things, various confessions based on how we rate things. So,
Okay.
I would say to someone, try to think of um, any confession you would make of any kind of sinful behavior and see it in exactly the same light.
Mm.
Maybe the implications may be more serious, but the actual confession of the sin, of the issue, really is exactly the same as anything we called upon to confess.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Toni, we actually have a question from a viewer for you specifically. And the question is, Toni, I would like to know how you first knew how to share your story, especially with loved ones. How did you know what content to share, especially with young relatives, which maybe is more a question for now, how you speak about it. But can you share that? I think everybody would like to know that.
Yeah, I think when I first started sharing my story, it was probably more inappropriate than the context required. I would just sort of say it out. I think over the years I've learned to do that differently. I think I speak very much about my story in terms of some of the unmet needs in my life. So growing up, there were certain unmet needs. I was always looking for attention and affirmation, and that really became more sexualized as I got older. And I think for me, pornography, when I discovered pornography, it felt like it met my needs in a way that nothing else had ever met my needs. It really wasn't meeting my needs, but
Mm.
it actually provided this kind of escape. It didn't give me what I truly needed, but it provided this escape. And so I think I talk about it more in terms of need. Even when I've talked to my children about it, my children are in their 20s now, but when I told them they were in their teens, I talked about it in terms of need, and I talked about how easy it is for us to grasp and reach for things that make us feel better, but those are not necessarily what God actually does provide for us when we're dealing with our real needs.
So you sought help, and it sounds like the first step was in being honest, which I think must be the first step in getting any kind of help. But what help is there available, Toni? Like out there today, if someone's watching or if you're helping someone, how can we lead people in the right direction?
Okay, so an organization like ours, Journey Canada, we work with many people dealing with uh, pornography addictions, all kinds of sexual and relational addictions. But I think too, counselors like Dianne, seeking help from a counselor who maybe has a specialty in addictions, I think those would be places where we'd want to go for help. There are 12-step programs as well available in many, many places if you look online. And then very simple things that we encourage people to do right away is there's a program called Covenant Eyes that you can actually put on your computer that actually will let accountability people know, you choose the accountability people, about which sites you've gone on. So I would say accountability with trusted friends. It's interesting when we're working with someone and we ask them to maybe choose a few trusted friends, it often turns out that some of their friends are dealing with the same issue as well. And so there's often mutual accountability. Your friends receive a printout of where you've gone, and that seems to actually help people quite a bit
Yeah, I
in
would
not
imagine it
going
would.
online. Yep. Yep.
Dianne, some people are scared of going to see a counselor, or they think, the word therapy freaks them out. Or tell us, reassure us that it's a healthy, normal thing to do. And tell us a little bit how you help people.
Yeah. I tell people every counselor needs a counselor too. Like there's no shame in getting help.
Yeah.
I think that it takes courage to seek help. A lot of people will come in and they think they're weak or they're, but it takes courage to step out of denial and get help. I think that choosing a counselor that you're comfortable with, obviously, making that first step, phoning a few maybe. I think counseling is a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
And I also know that it's very scary because I went to a counselor years ago, before I ever decided to become one. And it was really scary, but counselors can make you feel at ease pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a safe, it's anonymous, so to speak, right? There's confidentiality there that is a given that maybe you won't have with a friend or another trusted person. So definitely seeking out someone that's safe. I think counselors are people. And so, seeking one out that knows about addiction,
yeah,
I think is important, but regardless, a counselor will listen with empathy and compassion and offer help. And if they're not comfortable with that, or that's not an area that they've worked with, then they will refer on, or a good counselor will refer.
Yeah. I'm wondering about, with this topic, particularly the difference between a Christian counselor and a secular counselor, for lack of a better word. Does that matter here, or would all counselors, do you think, see that this could be a problem for someone? Or I guess you're following the lead of the person anyway, Dianne, right?
I've talked to several people who have been to Christian counselors or secular counselors, and they've never even been asked the question.
Okay.
About whether or not pornography is an issue.
Okay.
They haven't even talked about any kind of sexual issues. So I think being aware of that. If you go to a counselor and you're hoping that they're going to draw it out, they might not necessarily go there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. And if you walk
into the first place,
if you walk into a counselor's office, Dianne, you can be assured of confidentiality.
Yeah.
You are paying them, so you can share whatever you want, correct? And
That's
the
right.
counselor will listen, will ask the right questions, will help you, often discover for yourself, I think, the answers. Is that sort of how it works?
It is, and sometimes I find it happens quite a bit where people will go for counseling, but what they're really there for doesn't get disclosed until their session is just about over.
Okay. Yep,
and then, and then it's good if you have an extra 10 minutes so you can, assure them that that's okay to talk about that. And we can come back to that another time.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there are also these like programs that you can, do in your church and so on. And a participant is sharing that two resources in a group setting that have been valuable to them have been the Conquer series and Celebrate Recovery. So maybe we won't comment on actual individual programs, but if you could speak generally, Toni, to what is out there. And I mean, is it okay to go into a group setting and in a church and share this?
I would say yes. I think, depending, of course, if a church does a program well, and there is confidentiality ensured, I think there are a number of programs that really, like Celebrate Recovery, uh, that really do actually do a wonderful job of providing safe places for people. I think I personally like the idea of people journeying together, because I think it brings you out of that sense of I'm the only one with this issue,
Okay.
and suddenly you see people dealing with the same issue as you, and people dealing with other issues as than you are, but you sort of all in this together. I think for us, when people take our programs, one of the things that people are often shocked by is that how easy it becomes to actually share in a group. Maybe the beginning is hard, but knowing that other people are actually do understand what you're going through, and you're actually, doing what we've we've been asked to do as Christians, to walk alongside each other and really help each other, by being accountable, by supporting each other, as we struggle through this.
And I guess that would also go a long way toward taking the extra layer of shame on
Absolutely,
pornography use that we do.
absolutely.
Okay. Dianne, how about you? I mean, do you lead groups or are you specifically one-on-one? And what is the value of a group setting for you?
Yeah, I do lead groups, and I've been involved with Celebrate Recovery for years. I think that groups, you now have people that understand you.
Okay.
It's just not you're talking to somebody about something. It's like you're preaching to the choir. People understand, and it's kind of like a relief to know, but not just so that you have somebody to talk about. That's not going to hold you accountable. So what you're looking for is accountability, right? So it's nice to come alongside other people, but to encourage them to have accountability and to keep seeking that. But for sure, I think groups are biblical, right? Coming alongside, like Toni said, and walking with one another. Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about our own homes and our children. I'm thinking about, I have two sons and a daughter. And I mean, I guess I'm naturally biased, in fact, now that I think about it, to speak about it with my boys before I would speak to my daughter. So I need to think about that, I guess. But um, how does a parent bring this up? And do kids confess? Like, what's been your experience with that, Toni?
Yeah, I think with our boys, there were incidences that we discovered when they were quite young of them being sent pornographic pictures, and that actually, particularly with our oldest son, that really opened up this way to actually talk about sexuality. I think, with my eldest son and I, we do have a very close relationship where we do talk about everything, and so this was something we talked about right away. I think he's more of an extrovert, so it's often easier to talk to extroverts. With introverts, you are actually helping them understand, giving them as much knowledge as you can, giving them the space to actually ask you questions when they do have questions. But I would say to any parent, really ask the Lord to help you to really go against any kind of shyness and shame you might have in talking about this. Kids are actually hearing about this in school all of the time.
Okay.
And if we aren't giving a counter message, if we aren't talking about it, talking about God's intention, talking about simple practical things that they can do, um, for example, I talked about covenant eyes, but ways in which they can actually do things, and then also ways in which they can actually talk to you about what they've heard, what's going on at school. I think we have to actively engage our kids
Yeah.
on this, no matter how shameful it feels for us as parents.
Actually, the way I did it with one of my sons, and I wanted to mention this resource, the EFC put out a booklet called Battling Pornography, a guide for Canadians. And it's a discussion guide, which people can access on the efc.ca website. But I brought it home because I was part of, editing it. And I dropped it on the dining room table. And my son picked up and went, oh, yeah, everybody I know watches pornography. So that was an easy way to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I was thankful for that. But that is, that would be a way to bring up the topic too, to use a resource or something.
Right.
Dianne, we have a question that goes back to something we discussed a little bit before, and the healthcare system only pays for public sexologists, this person says. Talk about the benefits and drawbacks of a secular approach. Do you feel able to comment on that?
I think regardless of where you're seeking help, the big thing is that you're realizing that you need help.
Okay.
So if you're a Christian, you're gonna put that spin on any advice you get, right? If you're going to a counselor, your ultimate counselor, our divine counselor, is God. So can you? I think you can get. You can go to a counselor where they would maybe minimize the importance of recovery from this. They might think it's everybody does it, and it's, maybe they think the church makes too big a deal out of it. So you might get that.
Okay.
But I think if you're coming and it is an issue for you, then a counselor would see that as the issue. But I can't speak for other counselors. I can just speak for myself.
Sure. No, that's helpful, and that makes sense. How about pastors? Let's shift to that. Toni, you're working with churches. What do you see out there in terms of pastors being ready and prepared and equipped to help people with this, and how can we do better there?
I think pastors are generally not prepared well. We do a lot of work with seminaries and Bible colleges, and we notice that this is not something that's actually talked about or taught in their training. So I think, pastors go in trying to do the best that they can with what they have. What I would say is, be that non-anxious presence when someone discloses, but also be like the Good Samaritan. Have resources available that you can actually point people to. You don't have to be the one to actually do it all, but be aware, educate yourself about what's out there, educate yourself about who are good trusted counselors in your area, about programs that may be operating in your area. So you can actually point people to places. You don't actually have to be the one to actually walk with them all the way. But I would say, firstly, be that person that when someone does disclose to you, where they can basically look back and say, my pastor really didn't judge me. My pastor really helped point me in the right direction.
Okay, and should pastors be preaching about this? Like, I haven't heard a lot of sermons about this.
Absolutely. I think within the broader context, as I said earlier, of talking about sexuality and God's intent for sexuality, I think we also need to be speaking about neediness within the church and the neediness we all struggle with and the ways in which we try to fill those needs. Mm-hmm. And I think we should talk about actual struggles people have. I think pornography is one of the biggest struggles the males of this generation really are dealing with. And I think in order to be relevant, we really do need to actually be talking about it.
And I'm thinking a simple thing that churches could do, everybody has a great website these days, put a link up to, information about this and ministries that help deal with that. So if someone went to their website, they could just, click on it. Here's a really good question. Please speak to those afraid of using work health plan to pay for a counselor about porn use. And that is not a small issue. I have heard other people about even clergy who have a work supplied counseling outlet to them. We've had friends going through marital crisis who choose not to use that because they're afraid. So even with pornography, even more so. I mean, I think it comes down to that fear and shame thing again. But Dianne, how would you encourage someone in terms of, I guess, the confidentiality of counseling?
I'm a little bit confused about why they wouldn't use it, because the counselor isn't going to, but the counselor isn't going to report back.
Yes. Well, maybe that's all this
sharing.
person needs to hear. Yeah, just to remind people that confidentiality is completely guaranteed, whether your workplace is paying for the counseling or not, right?
Right. And I mean, if somebody has an addiction to pornography, they have other areas of their life that maybe is going to send them to counseling.
Yeah.
The shame and the guilt is weighing them down. They're not as productive. They're having problems in their marriage. That's what's going to send them there. Okay. And then the pornography will likely come out of that, I would say.
And their boss will not get a report back.
No.
In there. No.
We are nearing the end of our time. So I would like to invite you both to maybe just share from your experience and your heart, really words of encouragement and love and care for someone who might be battling with this. Dianne, do you want to begin?
I just would want to say, reach out to someone. Just take that first step and, do some reading about it. There's so many resources out there now. Like the one you said about the EFC, that is a really good resource. So even if it's an adult that's picking it up, and maybe it's the adult that's struggling, and you approach it as in dealing with your children, we need to end the secrecy. So just seek help. There's lots of help out there. There are as many understanding people as none. It's everywhere. It's men and women. I would say, especially for women, don't think that you're alone. You're not the only woman. If you're dealing with pornography, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Women struggle as well. So reach out, get the help, and start the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dianne. Toni?
The two things I think I'd want to say to anyone struggling, I would say, first of all, most of us have tried to stop, and we know that we can stop for a while, but usually we go back to it. And I want to say to you, this is a journey. You're not looking for a one-time event, a one-time word, a single cure that's going to make you all better. This is actually a journey of you continuing to trust God, but continue to look for actual practical help as you do this. And the second thing I would say to you, this is not about just really getting over a pornography addiction. It's not just about sobriety. It's actually about healing. It's about allowing yourself to actually look at the deeper needs in your life that actually propelled you toward using pornography in the first place. So don't be satisfied with just sobriety. Really pursue real healing for those hurting, wounded places.
Wow. And you both have witnessed this healing in people's lives, right? I mean, Toni, you've experienced your own life, but you've seen other people who've taken that brave step to come forward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that is great news. So thank you, Dianne and Toni. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would imagine people have found this incredibly helpful. I know I have. So this webinar will be posted online, so you can share it with people, share it with your church, and let's get this conversation happening even more. So thank you for joining us, everyone who participated today and viewed the webinar. Our next one is scheduled for Thursday, November 16th. And we're going to be talking about what churches have learned about refugee sponsorship. We're going to gather together some people who've been, on the ground, in the field, helping refugee families settle into Canada in the last 18 months or so, and share lessons learned. So you can find out about all of our webinars by going to the efc.ca. You can view this one again, and please feel free to contact us if you need resources or have questions. Thank you.